Shalom, WJC family. It is time for our weekly Torah Talk. This week's portion is Beshalach, the story of the parting of the Red Sea and the singing of Shirat Hayam, the song of the sea that we recite every morning in our morning prayers. And that is what Beshalach is most famous for. But I want to talk about something else that was made that was highlighted this week for me by Dr. David Kramer, the librarian of the magnificent library collection at the Jewish Theological Seminary. I am here with him in Reisterstown, Maryland, at the beautiful Pearlstone Event and Retreat Center at a annual conference, learning conclave run by the seminary, known as RTI, a chance for rabbis of the conservative movement to come together and to study and to learn Torah. Last year, very sadly, it was canceled. This year, because Torah learning is important, with a lot of difficulty, a lot of mask wearing, daily antigen testing, PCR tests, and the whole works. We've managed to gather here a few less rabbis than in a normal year, but still, and the learning has been magnificent. And Dr. Kramer, one of the great luxuries, one of the great pleasures of RTI is the professors from the seminary teach the classes. They also give Divrei Torah. And Dr. Kramer highlighted that in Beshalach, the people come out on the other side of the Red Sea, and they don't have anything to eat. And so God provides them manna and gives them very strict instructions that they can only collect one portion of manna for their family per day. The Midrash says if they gathered more, it would go bad, it would rot. However, they're told you can't collect manna on Shabbat. And so on Friday, you should collect two portions. Apparently, miraculously, even though now it had to keep for 2 days, it did. But what's interesting here is in this context, God gives the first laws of Shabbat. Right? You should not gather two portions on Shabbat. Collecting, carrying, gathering, that's the laws of Shabbat. Now, Dr. Kramer mentioned, this is still well before the revelation at Sinai. And his point was, what exactly is the revelation at Sinai? Why are we so fascinated by it? Why is it so important? And if you ask someone, they're likely to tell you, well, that's where we got the Torah. That's where we got the Torah. And what Dr. Kramer pointed out was, that's not really the case. Here, first of all, in last week's portion, we get what the medieval commentator Rashi points out is that he believes the first mitzvah, the first commandment in the Torah, it's in Parshat Bo, it's before even the 10th plague, where we're told to keep a calendar and that Nisan will be the first month of that calendar. So that's a mitzvah, that is Torah. But here, the fact that these laws of Shabbat that we're getting in the context of the manna are Torah are highlighted by the fact that God says in Exodus 16, verse 28, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, God said to Moses, Ad ana me'antem lishmor mitzvotai v'torotai. How long will you, Israelites, refuse to obey or to keep my mitzvot, my commandments, my guidance, vitorotai, and my teachings? God here, just on the other side of the Red Sea, is already referring to these commandments as Torah. And the commentator Ibn Ezra, he picks up on this. He says, my laws, for God taught them the reason for the Sabbath. They therefore gathered twice as much bread on the sixth day, etc., etc. So this Torah is the teaching of God. What did God teach them? Says Ibn Ezra, the laws of Shabbat. So Torah revelation begins here, long before Sinai. Long before. It's going to take 50 days to get there. It also continues, Dr. Kramer pointed out, long after. The Torah itself attests that all of it, the Torah, was not given on Sinai. Now, there are two traditions in this. Um, the great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel pointed out in his master work, the Torah min hashamayim, Torah from heaven, be'aspaklaria shel haderot, through the lens of the generations, a great work analyzing rabbinic theology, how the rabbis thought about the religion that they were transforming through their teachings. And the whole basis is that there are two views on this. One, that all of Torah was given on Sinai, and even the things that are going to be reported in the future, Moshe wrote on Sinai. And another one that takes the Torah more literally, that, they leave and they build a Mishkan. They leave Sinai, they build a Mishkan, they build the tabernacle. God comes and enters that tabernacle and starts giving them more mitzvot from the ark, from it says his voice, God's voice comes from between the cherubim on the ark. And then we have the book of Deuteronomy, which we're told Moses recites on the plains of Moab, right on the east bank of the River Jordan, just before going into the promised land. So Revelation is continual. And Dr. Kramer was pointing out that maybe we make a mistake when we say Torah was given on Sinai and that's it, and that's how it works, and you can't change it, and it is what it is. That in fact the Torah itself, as well as the rabbinic tradition, explains that that Torah is a process, that it continues to be interpreted and interpreted. These laws of Shabbat that we get even here are we know, not the last ones. More laws of Shabbat will be given on Sinai. The famous ones, Shamor and Zachor, I should keep and remember the Shabbat and keep it holy in the 10 Commandments, Yeseret Hadibrot, the 10 utterances. We get more rules for Shabbat from the Mishkan and the Holiness Code, and still more laws for Shabbat in Deuteronomy, from the plains of Moab. And we know that that figuring out exactly what Shabbat is and how to keep it continues on in the rabbinic era as they explore and add a lot of different ways of observing Shabbat. And there is great hope, great beauty in this. Oh, by the way, so of course, what makes Revelation at Sinai so powerful is that God was right there, right? This moment of national appearance of God. It's not that God only gave Torah on Sinai, but God only handed it over, divinity to human being on Mount Sinai in the form of written tablets. So Sinai is special, but we shouldn't think it's the only special thing. The truth is that the relationship with God, the revelation of God's nature, at least in small pieces, is available to us through the continual revelation of Torah, through continuing to study, through continuing to learn. That's why I came down to Maryland this week to study, to learn. Yeah, I love learning Torah, but the reason I love learning Torah is not only because digging into the arguments and the different ways of interpreting is religiously revelatory for me. It's fun. It's but also because it is directly revelatory, that through learning Torah, I learn more about God, and I learn more about myself, and I learn more about the relation between the two. That is why the continued revelation of Torah is so important. It's why it's so important to recognize that the revelatory process continues on, and it is why we continue not only to learn Torah, but also to teach Torah. I'm looking forward to sharing more of the Torah that I have acquired here at RTI. With all of you. And if you have Torah you would like to learn, or you have questions, we are always here to learn with you, to be your guide and your students. And that is how we will all experience the holiness, the Spirit of God, just like the Israelites in the desert after they crossed the Red Sea in Parshat Beshalach. Shabbat Shalom.